Hello, friends and subscribers. A very warm welcome back to another episode of Readings in Impact Investing. This is a new podcast created by myself, Daniel Rosehill, and the intention here is to take written material in the world of impact investing and bring it into audio so that you can listen to it at your convenience. The website is readingsinImpact.org. If you visit that URL, you can find a link to subscribe to the podcast at different locales on the internet: Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcast, as well as the YouTube channel, which it replicates onto, although it is an audio-only podcast. So in the last episode, as I mentioned, we looked at the Indigo database from the Government Outcomes Lab, GO Lab, a collaboration between Oxford and the British government, and they track outcomes funds, and we talked about some examples of outcomes funds in the world. We've talked in previous episodes. I read a very good resource they have explaining what outcomes funds are, which is very useful, I would say, for anyone who is new to this idea. So what I thought I would do today is dive into EOF, Education Outcomes Fund, to look in depth at one outcomes fund rather than look in less deeply at a few. For once, I attempted to find a big meaty PDF and was left disappointed. I went on to the news and publications part of their website. They didn't really find kind of just a explainer PDF. So what I'm going to do instead is read from a few parts of their website. The pages that I've picked out and which I think will together give a good feel for what it is they're doing in Ghana and Sierra Leone is firstly our vision. This sets out basically their mission as it says. Then we have the EOF model, which we'll look at, and that's not super long. And again, I realize as a podcast that I can't get everything visually across, but I try my best to describe what I see with words. And then we finally have the evidence case studies. Sorry, that's not finally. There's the evidence case studies. And then there's going to be FAQs. So there's going to be a 4-part look at EOF. So that instead of reading their website, I'll just read it to you. So let's start with our vision. Let's face an uncomfortable truth. We face an urgent global learning crisis. By 2030, over half of the world's children will be failing to learn, a figure that has grown in the wake of COVID-19. How can we expect those children to succeed without having learned to read and count properly? At the same time, many countries are confronted by a youth unemployment crisis, which prevents the next generation from achieving better livelihoods and hampers economic growth. It's time to consider a new solution to address these twin crises. How can we expect better outcomes if we continue to adopt the same approaches? We need to understand why our education and employment systems are not delivering the change we need and how we can help them to do better. A big challenge is finance. Existing funding for education and employment programs is insufficient and is not used effectively. Too often, this funding is highly fragmented and focused on specific inputs and activities. And I just want to interject here that I'm sure they're using this word deliberately. This is really the difference when we're talking about results-based financing and outcomes-based financing. We're looking at channeling money into the outputs of these interventions instead of paying for inputs. Let's continue. No longer do funders pay for a pre-agreed list of activities and set programming from education providers. Instead, they define what outcomes they want to see, give providers the flexibility to respond to the needs of the beneficiaries, and only pay for the measurable impact these interventions deliver. Our aim is to pool at least $1 billion in aid and philanthropic funds by the year 2030 to transform the lives of over 10 million children and youth. So let me just reread that sentence because it's basically the kernel of their mission. Our aim is to pool at least $1 billion in aid and philanthropic funding by the year 2030 in order to transform the lives of over 10 million children and youth. So they have 2030, of course, is not chosen by accident. It's the year of the SDGs or the SDG target date. And outcomes funds, for those who missed that episode, the very quick simple is that This is a definition advanced by Sir Ronald Cohen, who I've mentioned a couple of times I work for, but this podcast is very much my own private initiative. But a definition that Ronnie likes is that they're pools of grant capital. The point has been made many times that outcomes funding makes them sound a bit like investment vehicles, and that is misleading because they are philanthropic funding, grant capital. I don't know at this point whether that name is going to change. It's clearly baked into EOF, but just to make that point. So 1 billion, they're trying to pool that money together from different sources, and that is supposed to help 10 million recipients. Through our game-changing partnership model, we incentivize success by only paying for results achieved, working closely with governments to help scale programs that demonstrate the best results and present the best value for money. Our mission is to 1. Achieve better learning and employment outcomes for 10 million children and youth in support of Sustainable Development Goal SDG number 4, inclusive and quality education for all. Mission objective 2, sustainably strengthen education and employment systems by building the capacity of teaching institutions, as well as governments, policymakers, and service providers that support them. Then we have Objective 3, develop outcomes funds and results-based finance as development tools to be effective, efficient, and scalable, enabling them to play a valuable role in achieving the SDGs in education and beyond. So I think, and this is my commentary, that the third mission is to kind of use EOF as a model, or hold it out as a model for other thematic outcomes funds. And they don't use that word specifically, but I think it's important because the potential for outcomes funds is very much thematic, that we can look at key social and environmental issues and focus capital to them from various sources. And the big advantage here, and this is just me commenting again, is that these are providing steady sources of capital. They're pooling capital together so that people trying to work on these problems don't have to assemble that capital every time over, reinventing the wheel potentially thousands of times in pursuit of the same objectives. So that's their vision. And now let's look at the EOF model. So working to outcomes in the education sector is revolutionary. It changes the way in which donors, governments, impact investors, and education organizations can achieve positive impact through a new model of funding and evaluating programs. No longer do funders pay for a set of activities and rigid programming with limited evaluation of their impact. Instead, they define what outcomes they want to see, and they only pay for the measurable social change that the interventions deliver. So then they have the EOF model overview, talking about the roles of each stakeholder. So let's start with government. Government is a key partner in every project, ensuring funding and programs are aligned with their national priorities. They co-fund outcomes, support the enabling environment, and with our support, build capacity to commission for outcomes. Next, we have outcome funders. Outcomes funders come together to deepen their impact by paying for long-term sustainable outcomes after they are achieved, transferring delivery risk to the private sector and improving overall program performance and value for money. Next, we have the impact investors, provide upfront working capital investments where required, and support the education organizations to build capacity and deliver better results. They achieve a measurable impact as well as an uncorrelated financial return. Next, we have education organizations. They work with a new rigor to deliver to outcomes rather than inputs, with the flexibility and support to innovate and adapt based on what is working on the ground. Finally, of course, we have the education organizations who work with a new rigor to deliver to outcomes rather than inputs, with the flexibility and support to innovate and adapt based on what is working on the ground. And the goals, to reiterate them, 1, 2, and 3. 1 is achieve better learning and employment outcomes for millions of children and youth in pursuit of Sustainable Development Goal number 4. Goal 2, build capacity in education systems and related institutions. And Goal 3, develop outcomes funds and impact bonds as effective, efficient, scalable development tools that can play a major role in achieving the SDGs in education and beyond. Paying for what matters and only when it works. We use results-based finance to intelligently commission for outcomes in a way that rewards the things that matter in a children's education and avoid the potential pitfalls. Promote equity. We will use cohort pricing to pay more for outcomes for more marginalised populations in order to recognise that it costs more to get them learning and that we need stronger incentives to ensure that we leave no child behind. I just want to point out that this so-called cohort pricing is, I believe, sometimes also referred to as tariffs, as in the idea that there would be different tariffs for different target groups. Reward learning gains. We will typically use a distance-travelled approach to ensure that all learning gains are rewarded, lifting those in the bottom and the top of the class. We also plan to use learning-adjusted years of schooling, LAYS, developed by the World Bank to differentiate schooling from learning and allow standardised cross-country comparisons. Next, measure what matters. We will aim to capture the breadth of education, going beyond core academic skills like literacy and numeracy, to also incentivise improvements in social emotional skills, ICT skills, citizenship skills, and other competencies needed for the jobs and citizens of the 21st century. Mitigate the risk. We will only pay for outcomes that are achieved, with the private sector typically taking the risk that programs don't deliver results. We will also mitigate the risk for children and youth, with diligent provider screening and selection, and ensuring rigorous and consistent safeguarding practices. Next, we have improve value for money. We will systematically shift funds towards those programs that deliver the best results and the best value for money, thereby driving down transaction costs on all our contracts. Now we have the evidence. So that was the model. The evidence is growing that outcomes contracts deliver tangible results. Outcomes initiatives are becoming increasingly common in the education and employment space, and they are delivering real results. So they present here a series of case studies. The first case study is Educate Girls in India. Educate Girls launched the first development impact bond in Rajasthan's Bhilwara district in September 2015. Rajasthan has particularly acute educational challenges. 1 in 10 girls aged 11 to 14 in the state aren't enrolled in school, and less than a quarter of rural children at grade 3 can read a grade 2 level paragraph or solve a subtraction problem. The programme was measured against two outcomes: learning gains of boys and girls in grades 3 to 5 and the enrolment of out-of-school girls. Results at the end of the 3-year programme showed impressive results. 116% of the final enrolment target was achieved, and 160% of the final learning target was achieved. In the final year, learning levels for students in programme schools grew 79% more than their peers in other schools, almost the difference of an entire educational year of instruction. The success of the programme led to Educate Girls being named the first Audacious Project recipient in Asia. Using funding from the project, a massive philanthropic effort launched by TED, Educate Girls will expand to 35,000 villages across India, working to enrol the 1.6 million girls who are currently out of school. Next, we have the Colombia Youth Employment Initiative. The unemployment rate in Colombia among vulnerable populations, such as young people and women, who are more likely to work in Colombia's large informal sector, is one of the highest in Latin America. The armed conflict in Colombia has exacerbated labour market inequalities. The first Colombian social impact bond was launched in 2017 in Bogota, Cali and Pereira to provide sustained employment for vulnerable youth and in particular individuals internally displaced due to armed conflict. Results released after 2 years of implementation showed that 899 people were placed into formal jobs, 117% of the 766 expected outcome beneficiaries. 677 people were retained in their jobs for 3 months, which was 88% of the 766 expected outcome beneficiaries, and 309 people were retained in their jobs for 6 months. That was 60% of 514 expected outcome beneficiaries. Therefore, the outcomes achieved were beyond the targets initially agreed, and this led to the program being scaled up. Quality Education in India. The $11 million Quality Education India Development Impact Bond, DIB, has reported a 30% increase in the number of children achieving its benchmark learning outcomes in its first year of activity. The 4-year program aims to improve numeracy and literacy outcomes for children aged 5 to 11 across 600 schools in Delhi and Gujarat. The bond is funding the delivery of teaching enhancement programs to 600 schools, reaching more than 100,000 students aged 5 to 11. Based on an independent evaluation of more than 12,000 students, The program has resulted in almost a third more students achieving a basic literacy and numeracy skills, and 40% of the target schools demonstrating significantly higher improvements in proficiency. Morocco education and training for employability. Morocco struggles with unemployment, and there are gaps in skills and competencies presented by job seekers and the ones needed by the market, such as soft skills, proficiency in foreign languages, skills related to job search and technical knowledge. An RBF program was launched. RBF is results-based finance, with the objective to place 8,000 beneficiaries in jobs. The outcomes metrics which are being measured are completion of training, placement into formal job, and job retention for 6 months. 8 providers were selected through a competitive process. Some of the results observed so far are that service providers took advantage of the flexibility to achieve the expected results. For example, they were able to adapt to sector changes during the pandemic. They were also able to adapt and shift their focus to the automobile industry when the conflict in Ukraine led to a surge in demand. The program introduced performance management systems to support providers. Proyecto Tu Futuro in Argentina. Argentina also faced high youth unemployment rates. The situation was aggravated by the COVID pandemic due to the loss of jobs and also to the interruption of studies, which reduces young people's abilities to secure jobs. The Social Impact Bond was launched in 2018 and lasted for 3 years, supporting vulnerable young people in the city of Buenos Aires to access skills and employment training so that they could secure and maintain jobs. The program achieved the outcomes beyond the initial targets. 89% of the target beneficiaries received training, 36 of them were placed in a job, 69% of those retained the job for 4 months, and 51% retained the job for 12 months. Finally, we have the Australia Job Active program. Job Active is a federal employment service program launched from 2015 to 2022 in Australia, seeking to promote stronger workforce participation and help more job seekers move from welfare into work. The program had a strong focus on results. Once 48% of the payment metrics were for fixed fees and 52% for outcome payments for job retention. The program emerged as a response to key challenges: absence of a strong link between training and job placement, poor initial assessment for effective matching post-placement support, lack of flexibility to address job seekers' unique needs. Between 2018 and 2019, there was a approximately 49% retention rate after 3 months on average. The program was designed to improve accountability to beneficiaries through the star rating system, which provides a rating to the service providers based on their performance. Finally, we'll look at the FAQ section of their website. Where do we operate? We are a global fund committed to supporting governments across the world to tackle the learning crisis. In September of 2022, the government of Sierra Leone and EOF launched the $18 million Sierra Leone Education Innovation Challenge, which focuses on improving the literacy and numeracy levels of approximately 134,000 Sierra Leonean primary school children in more than 325 schools. The program has a focus on girls' education, with additional payments made for improvements in their learning. In Ghana, EOF, in partnership with the Government of Ghana and the World Bank, launched the $30 million Ghana Education Outcomes Program, which targets out-of-school children, providing remedial interventions to reintegrate 70,000 children back into school. It will also offer additional support to primary school teachers to improve learning outcomes for approximately 105,000 children across the country in 600 public schools. The interventions will respond to the COVID-19 pandemic with distance learning and focus on protecting girls and other vulnerable populations, and additional payments will be made for girls' learning. How are we just to recap, 2 major projects there. The Sierra Leone Education Innovation Challenge, $18 million, and the Ghana Education Outcomes Program, $30 million. How are we governed? The Education Outcomes Fund is an independent global trust fund hosted at UNICEF. EOF has complete operational and programmatic independence, while UNICEF provides a fiduciary platform and legal procurement, HR, and administrative support. The EOF Secretariat is governed by the High-Level Steering Group, which acts as a steward for strategic decisions, and secondly by the Executive Committee, which provides advice, oversight, and also governs key decisions on EOF's operational strategy and programs. Who are our partners? We were set up by the Educational Commission and the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, the GSG, in 2018. Over the past several years, we have been privileged to have had the support of donor and philanthropic organisations across the world, including, and they've a list here, UK Aid, Ford Foundation, UBS Optimus Foundation, Omidra Network, Atlassian Foundation International, Elko Dangote Foundation, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Alma Foundation, Big Win Philanthropy, Sir Ronald Cohen, Koika, Seco, Bank of America, Hempel Foundation, Dubai Cares, and finally the Lego Foundation. Don't we need more money to fix the learning crisis? The learning crisis can't be fixed by money alone. If you analyse the learning outcomes by spending level in countries around the world, you find that countries can spend the same amount of money and achieve very different results. For example, Vietnam, which outperforms many wealthy economies, spends the same money as Tunisia, which has lower results. There are multiple examples where huge sums of money are being spent on innovative programs, but because the right measurement and evaluation are not put in place, we have no idea whether the funding is driving results. What type of outcomes could be included in an EOF program? EOF works with donors and governments to identify education priorities for disadvantaged children. Education outcomes might include early childhood education outcomes such as school readiness and primary school transition, children's developmental outcomes, structure and process quality in preschools and daycare centres, basic education outcomes such as retention rates, transition rates from primary to secondary school, reintegration and retention of out-of-school children, and literacy and numeracy rates, and employment outcome. These could be job placements, job retention rates, and increased income. EOF will measure and pay for what matters, both core skills like literacy and numeracy, but also critical 21st century skills such as socio-emotional skills, ICT skills, and other broader fundamentals of a quality education. Our programs will place a special focus on underserved populations, including the hardest to reach rural populations, girls, children with disabilities, and refugees. Final FAQ is why engage non-state actors. EOF will work in 3 areas of education: early childhood education, school management support for basic education, and technical and vocational education and training programs. EOF is not proposing non-state actor involvement in the core delivery of basic education. Non-state actors are already active in education across low-income countries. They include community schools, faith-based schools, charities and NGOs, and low-cost for-profit private schools. They play a vital role extending the educational reach to remote or excluded communities and bringing access and improved learning to classrooms. In places where resources are constrained, this is an important contribution that can help to support governments to meet the increasing demand for education as their populations continue to grow. However, evaluation and regulation of non-state education providers varies. This is an area where EOF can make a difference. By bringing non-state actors into education through outcomes contracts, there is an opportunity to increase oversight and accountability. Outcomes contracts rely on robust evaluation methods to ensure that providers are delivering the learning outcomes and improving educational standards across the board. By introducing greater accountability and oversight over non-state actors, governments can better assess where they can play the most effective role within their education systems. They can make better strategic decisions with more access to resources and data. So that concludes the introduction to the work of the Education Outcomes Fund, or the EOF. We had the vision, we had the model, we had some examples of case studies, and finally we had the FAQ section. I hope this has been a useful overview for those interested in education funds generally, or EOF specifically. Hopefully we'll be looking at more outcomes funds as in the future, given that this is a very relevant area. Thanks for listening to another episode. To subscribe, visit readingsandImpact.org, and until the next time.